her death just about devastated me. There are days when you're like, good, I'm good, I'm good. And then all of a sudden you're not good.
My heart hurts.
Grief, it's a heart-wrenching emotion that most of us will likely have to experience in our lifetime. Often we're unprepared for the overwhelming pain and sorrow, and we struggle to know how to support friends who have lost loved ones.
If I would have known even a little bit of what I know now, when I had friends who had loved ones pass away, I would have treated them a lot different.
Today's guest on Grieving Out Loud is not only the CEO of one digital marketing agency, but two. Natalie Eisenberg heads up operations at both ClickRain and Lemonly. But today we're talking to this businesswoman about her very personal passion project, teaching others about grief.
Grief shows up in all of us, in the totality of who we are. And it changes us and changes us forever.
Well, Natalie, welcome to the podcast. We know each other, but it's great to have you on to talk about this subject. I mean, it's a heavy subject, but I'm so happy to talk to you about something different that I haven't talked to you about before.
Thank you, Angela. Well, I've been a major follower of yours, and I think you've been an inspiration to many of us as we're on our own grief journeys, and eager to dig into this with you a little bit today.
Yeah, well, the podcast is called Grieving Out Loud because it is one of the things that when I first launched it that I really wanted to address was this subject of grief that seems so hidden and pushed down by our society. And I just thought, I am going to talk about it. And then also, obviously, there's all the stigma and everything surrounding the opioid crisis and fentanyl and all of that. But the grief piece, I think people feel grief is so incredibly isolating.
I completely agree with you. And if I could have picked a theme for the way I'm feeling about grief, it's just that. It's grieving out loud. It's trying to bring light to this topic that is kind of brushed under the rug still, I think, a little bit. And it's just something that we haven't talked about a whole lot as a society, even though we've talked a lot about mental health. I think
Right.
this is definitely an aspect of mental health, and it's definitely a very trying time for our mental health. And so just trying to bring a little more light to the topic as well.
I think the problem is that people are afraid of grief. Like they don't really want to admit that they may have to experience it someday. They will, more than likely. I mean, more than likely, every
Mhm.
single one of us will experience this emotion. I guess you could call it an emotion called grief, right? It's more than
Mhm.
emotion.
Yeah, it's this whole experience. And I think you're right, actually. It's a scary thing. It's something that we don't want to face necessarily, especially when we're young. We think we might get around it somehow. But as our lives play out, maybe we realize a little more that we're not going to get around it and that we're going to run into it at some point in our lives. And sometimes maybe you could resonate with this, but I don't really want to be talking about grief. I wish I wasn't. I don't want to be the poster child for grief necessarily, but having experienced it over the last year or so myself, really personally, it's just something that I feel like, wow, I didn't know a lot of this. And I think more people should know.
Natalie's grief journey started about a year ago in May of 2023 when she lost her mom to pancreatic cancer.
My mom, Bonnie Cheddar, who was, an angel on earth and did a lot with youth and with community, with her church. She was really a selfless lady and a really awesome mother.
While Natalie is thankful to have had such an amazing role model, it made the cancer diagnosis all the more devastating. Her mom died just 9 months later.
It's an aggressive cancer, and so once we knew it was pancreatic, we knew that we didn't probably have a lot of time. And so you kind of begin that process of anticipatory grief, knowing what's coming. In this case, we could see it coming. So that whole 9 months, I remember that Christmas was really, really hard for me. It was probably harder than the Christmas after her loss, just because I knew it could be the last.
While those 9 months were incredibly challenging for Natalie and her family, she says her mom's positive attitude made it a bit easier to bear.
She had eternity in mind as she was facing this cancer and the faith that we would once again be together. So that was a big part of her experience. And just she also is and was a just a strong woman. She had faced some adversity in her life already. She lost a husband at a very young age, and she lost her parents at a pretty young age. And she was a single mom for a period of time. And so she went through some hard things. And as her daughter growing up, sometimes I would bring her hard things in my life. Her attitude was kind of like, and you can get through this and you will get through this. And so with the cancer, it was very much, we're going to get through this too. We're going to enjoy every moment we have together, and you guys are going to be okay. So she was pretty encouraging, very strong. We had a couple of like more vulnerable moments, she and I, where we just had to sit and cry because we knew she was dying.
I think one of the worst things about cancer is the suffering that the patient has to go through. Did your mother have to suffer very much? I mean, the treatments themselves can be worse than the cancer and the body shutting down and dying.
She was a trooper the whole time, certainly. And I know that the treatments themselves were not comfortable, but toward the end, in fact, it was about Easter of last year, there was some major discomfort. And we had plans as a whole family to meet in Minneapolis, where my brother lives, for Easter. She just really wanted that to happen. And so I know she wasn't feeling good at all. We all came from different places to meet in Minneapolis, and we actually sat down and had a really direct conversation as just kind of our immediate family over Easter, knowing that we were nearing the end. So, yeah, she had some discomfort. I think my dad saw most of that as her primary caretaker. And
Mm.
so, almost a year later, I think he still struggles with the pain that he saw her go through.
Oh, yeah. David
Mhm.
Kessler, a grief expert, says that the first 2 years are early grief. Early grief. I don't think society gives us that kind of grace in terms of time, but I can really
Mhm.
see that that's the case with myself and almost everybody I work with who is grieving. And we have a support group now at Emily's Hope, and we're rather large of people who've lost, it's usually a child, but a loved one to addiction or overdose, fentanyl poisoning. And so a lot of people have just lost somebody recently. And I just say, it takes a lot of time to heal. Then you'll never, be over it. It's not like it's just going to go away.
Mhm.
Yeah.
How many years has it been now for you, Angela?
Is 6 years in May, which astounds me. It astounds me that I have survived 6 years. And I have to say, grief gets easier to carry. That is the way I think of it, because I still carry it and something will touch me or affect me, or a memory, that kind of thing. And I'll let myself cry for like 2 or 3 minutes. And then I'll just go off my day, like as if nothing happened. But I couldn't do that in year one or year two. It was more debilitating.
Absolutely. And even just what you're touching on with that good cry, I've learned even just in this last year how necessary that is. And you're due for one almost. You're due for a good cry, and it's kind of like you're just under the surface, and you can kind of feel yourself almost going there, but sometimes you're just not in a setting to do so. And so you have to find the right setting. Be intentional about finding the right setting, and sometimes, facing the photos or the song or whatever it is that actually brings the tears, because it does help. It does help to let them flow.
Right. It's a cleansing
Mhm.
in a way, I think.
And even though we had all those more positive death experiences, it, certainly is still a huge loss to our family, a huge dynamic shift for our family, and a big loss for our community. So I'm kind of a solver, in business and in life. I think I take after my dad and I like to fix things. And I was noticing this experience of grief, and that, wow, if I would have known even a little bit of what I know now when I had friends who had loved ones pass away, I would have treated them a lot different. And so I wanted to try and bring light to that and teach people what it's like to be a griever and what feels good and what doesn't feel so good.
So, did you start researching grief, or what did you do?
Well, I certainly was feeling it. And then I was getting all these grief resources from my church and from friends who had maybe lost a parent, sharing a book or a resource that might be helpful to me. And then also had a lot of people reach out to me who had also lost parents. So you have this new shared bond, just, starting a little bit of a dialogue. And through all that, I just felt like there were some learnings. So I was kind of experiencing and studying at once. And it just got placed on my heart that I wanted to share more about how to best support grievers.
I think this was probably a way for you to find meaning in your mother's death. They say that
Hmm.
is one thing that's, I mean, it's something that obviously I've done with the charity and with this podcast, but I mean, just all different ways for us to find meaning in the loss of a loved
Hmm.
one because it's really important that we do that, I think, when it comes to healing.
Yes, finding the meaning. And part of it is just wanting to do right by her. And my mom was a very hands on person. If there was something to be solved, she wanted it solved. And she was very giving to others as far as her time and her energy. And so some of that too, yeah, it's meaningful to me to do something around her death because I think it does honor her.
Oh, I'm sure. And I really think that your mother also lives on through you. She's
Hmm.
definitely in your DNA. So
Yeah.
you probably have many of her personality traits and other things. And also, it strikes me that you were very fortunate to have such a wonderful mom and to be close to her
Mhm.
because not everybody gets that in
I
life.
know.
Yeah.
It's so true. I've had that realization too. Very blessed.
Natalie is now hoping to bless others by taking what she has learned about grief and turning it into a valuable resource.
It actually began when some friends of mine were hosting a conference here in Sioux Falls. The conference is called Culture Con, and they're really wanting topics that are relative to anyone in any business setting and culture. With my work in business and focus in culture, I thought this was an important topic to bring forward. So I asked them if I could speak at Culture Con. And that's what I really did the initial research for. And it was kind of a speed talk, I guess. It was only about 20 minutes. And I hoped that maybe a couple people in the room would feel connected to my message. And I walked off the stage and I couldn't even make it to my table without having people come up to me and say, "Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for raising this topic." And so it really opened my eyes to just how important it is to be talking about grief and how common it is in our lives and how so many people have experienced it. And we're thankful that we were looking at it from a griever's perspective.
To prepare for her speech, Natalie created a survey to gather people's experiences with grief. About 70 people participated, providing some insightful information.
I asked people essentially, what were helpful things that people did for you when you were grieving? What was not so helpful? And any other thoughts you have, pretty much was the survey. That was really the basis for my content.
And the one thing that I see on your website that you talk about first is what an all encompassing thing grief is. That it's not just like I talked about it being an emotion, but it's not just an emotion.
Yeah. After I did the presentation, I wanted to kind of encapsulate the content in a little bit of a takeaway. And so I built the website learnaboutgrief.com. It just kind of outlines the things that I learned in this process. So grief shows up as it's not just a feeling, it's actually thoughts, feelings, and actions. When we're grieving, our mind can be focused on just the grief for a period of time. I remember myself being in business meetings and being pretty distracted and kind of foggy. It shows up as feelings, and feelings all over the board. It's not just sadness. It's not just the emptiness. It can be, no feelings at all. You might feel kind of numb. It could be a relief for some people. So a range of feelings. And then in actions, the things you do as you're experiencing grief could be all over the board too. So the point there is that grief shows up in all of us in the totality of who we are. And it changes us and changes us forever. Probably more drastic at the beginning, and then that kind of can change over time.
What has grief taught you?
I think grief has taught me that I'm pretty small. The problems I have in the day to day are pretty small.
Mhm.
It has put so much in perspective for me and turned my focus toward loving more and caring more for the people around me.
It's interesting you say that because a fellow grieving mother was talking to me last night about she works in a customer service job And she
Mhm.
has, like, no time for some of these complaints people have now.
Yeah.
She's like, "This doesn't matter. Don't you understand this how insignificant this is?" And I think you sort of touched on that. Like, it kinda puts life in perspective of what matters and what really matters and what doesn't.
Completely. For a period of time, some of the things that I was maybe pretty controlling over in my life, like the dinner schedule at our house. I pretty much managed that and did the grocery shopping and, made sure that we were only having tacos once a week and not three, that kind of stuff. But for a while there, after my mom died, my husband was like, what should we have for dinner? And I was just like, I don't care. It
Right.
doesn't matter to me. Insignificant things are even more insignificant.
And it's interesting you mention control because I know you're a successful business leader, probably, I'm guessing, a type A personality, which I'm freely admit I am as well. And so
Mhm.
control is a big part of that. And I heard a really interesting concept surrounding grief and guilt. And I was going to ask you if you ever felt any guilt. And I think most grievers do feel guilt at one point. Oh, I
Mm.
should have said this, or I should have done this, or if only I had done this. And I heard that guilt during grief is a way for the mind to try to control the situation because the mind needs control all the time in a situation that was completely out of our control. And it's so hard for many, many people to not have any control. And that is really where guilt comes from is control.
That's pretty fascinating. I had never thought that way. Certainly had feelings of woulda, shoulda, done things a little bit differently. Absolutely. One thing I wish I would have done was more like video interviewing with my mom.
Oh, sure.
Part of it for us was that, we didn't really necessarily want to talk about the end. We were focused on the living for that 9 months that we had and didn't want to put a whole lot of attention to that reality. I do kind of wish that I had more video of her. I could hear her voice in more ways but we didn't. So here we are.
Yeah. And I think acceptance is a huge thing, accepting what is, right? Accepting that that
Wonderful.
is how you spent your time with her doing other things and
Right.
that's what is. And so acceptance is such a huge part of the process of grief, but it takes a while to get there.
Yeah, it does. And some days, do you still have moments of disbelief?
Yes. Where I'm like, I
Mhm.
can't believe that she's gone. Oh, but she
Right.
is. I know she is. But I can't
Right.
believe that this happened to our family. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think those will probably be with me for as long as I live. But I also think that is the mind's need to control things,
Mhm.
that we can't control.
Right.
And so you also came up with some lists on your website of like how to help the
Mhm.
grieving, what not to say. Every grieving person I've talked to is like, oh my God, I can't believe this person said this to me. I was so offended that somebody said this. One thing that I always say is that if somebody says the wrong thing to you, you kind of have to give them a pass because they really don't understand. I don't think most people are trying to be malicious. Some people maybe, but I don't think most people are trying to be malicious. Did anybody say anything to you or what things happened that you would say, "Don't do that," if someone is grieving? I know showing up is a very important thing. Just
Oh,
showing up.
yes. The showing up. So this is one of those things that I know I fell down on before I learned this personally. So, of course, had people in my life lose parents or lose loved ones. I maybe didn't even go to the visitation. I maybe didn't even send a card because my thought process was like, well, I didn't know their dad, that kind of thing. And maybe I sent a text message or something like that. But so the showing up, I just can't believe the feeling of seeing some people at those events that you maybe didn't expect. Somebody from a past professional relationship to show up or friendship from a long time ago and they show up and it was so meaningful to have those experiences. So now I know when somebody in my life experiences this, I am definitely going to show up and I'm definitely going to go to the visitation even if I didn't know the person who passed. It's all about the survivor, the surviving family and loved ones.
I used to think, "Oh, I don't like funerals." I don't like funerals. I'm not
Right.
yeah. I used to think,
Right.
Why would I go to that?" Yeah, I didn't know their parent or whatever, and that has completely changed for me that I will always show up if someone I know has lost somebody, even if I didn't know their loved one. But I think a lot of people feel the way that you and I felt before this thing happened to us.
It's uncomfortable, it's a little bit of an uncomfortable setting, but it's the most uncomfortable is for the people who lost the loved ones. So just show up, absolutely show up. And a text message is awesome. Every single acknowledgement is meaningful.
I think, like, I don't remember the texts. I remember getting texts, but I can't tell you who
Mhm.
texted me and who didn't during that time. Of course, this was a sudden death. I wasn't prepared for it. So I don't know if you have a better memory than I do since you knew this was happening or if this is for like for everybody. But remembering who texts me is not necessarily something. I mean, I probably appreciated the texts at the time and I knew I was getting that support or those vibes being sent my way, but I did save the cards and I do know I believe I remember almost everybody who showed up at the visitation and or the funeral.
Exactly. You do. And you can read back on some of that, like the guest book and things like that. And
Right.
I don't know, it's affirming that that support was there. And I also had a learning around, I had a former boss of mine lost his daughter. And this was before my mom's whole stuff. And I remember feeling kind of tacky because I had a card and I didn't get in the mail for like a few weeks after the funeral. And I thought, oh, this is really tacky, but I'm going to send it anyway. And for us, when we received a card 3 weeks after the funeral, it was like actually really, really nice because it kind of continued that support. So I said, it's never too late to
Right.
reach out to someone if you maybe missed that original wave of experience. So the showing up is huge and you can do it in a lot of ways. But when I asked in the survey what was helpful to people, one thing too was just to hear the name of their loved one. And I can absolutely resonate with that. And a lot of times it happens when we're at family gatherings and I'll hear my mom's name mentioned like across the room, like "Ba- ba- 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 honey." And I just like, I want to insert myself and I want to hear about it. What was the memory? What was the story? It just warms my heart to hear her name spoken. And I think maybe to those who haven't experienced it personally, it might feel like, oh, I don't want to bring it up or
Right.
is it awkward? No, it is not awkward. There's nothing I love more than to hear my mom's name. How about you?
Yeah, 100%. And in our family, I probably told a lot more Emily stories early on, especially with family and or with friends. But now we all tell them. Like my kids are very comfortable talking, telling Emily stories. And I noticed that has sort of evolved over the years. Of course, my children were very young in high school yet
Yeah.
when she died. But as they mature and it's something that we freely talk about in our family, I think it can be a little annoying to outsiders if I talk about her too much. They like,
Yeah.
oh, you haven't let that go yet. You should let that go and move
Yeah.
on, which is those are such false ideas, we know. But I think
Uh,
it goes back to that person's uncomfortableness with death in general,
right.
or even the anticipation of their own losses. But yeah, saying their name is so important. And of course, we named the charity after Emily, so her name gets said a lot.
Yes, it does. Yes.
Yeah.
And in great context in that way.
Yeah.
One other thing that I've learned and I tried to implement in my own life is remembering those milestone dates of people. I have a couple of coworkers who I know have lost loved ones over the past few years. And it was after my mom died. And it was actually probably in the process of doing this project that I realized that that really is a best practice to know, like, what are the days that they might be struggling, whether it be Mother's Day or Father's Day or a birthday or the death anniversary. I try and write those things down in my calendar as best I can for the people in my life and acknowledge them. It's been, almost a year now for me, and it's honestly like it's getting quieter of people checking in on me. So whenever someone does, like it really brings a lot of comfort and I appreciate it a lot.
Right, because life marches on. We're still grieving, but life goes on and people go on with their lives and they forget. So I think just writing that down in the calendar, I have most birth dates and death dates of people I know who've lost someone written down in my calendar, but sometimes even then I might not always remember or look at my calendar and think, "Oh yeah, I need." But even I think in that case, that's when a text is appreciated because you're not hearing from so many people and just
Yeah,
a text is something like, "Oh, thinking of you on this day. Hope you're doing okay."
so good. It's so meaningful. Mhm. So then I asked in this survey and I included on my website are some things that my group of survey respondents kind of had said like are not so helpful as a grieving person. So I guess a couple highlights from that section would be some triggering comments or questions. One that was really common and that I resonated with was just kind of like the default, how are you? As you're walking through the office or, if you run into somebody in a restaurant. And honestly, I even remember it from the visitation. People would say,
Yes.
"How are you?"
How do you think I am? I'm horrible.
Uh,
Horrible, thanks
right,
for asking. I think
right.
that's another podcast.
Yeah,
Or terrible, thanks for asking. Yeah.
yeah, it is. And it's a whole different thing if someone is asking, "How are you, Angela?" And they're truly asking.
How are you really? Yes.
Right.
Right.
Mhm. But that flippant default kind of, "How are you?"
Yeah.
It's bothersome.
Nobody really wants to know how you are when they ask that.
Exactly. So that was one of them. And then, God needed them more than we did kind of
Yeah.
stuff.
Or, oh, they're with Jesus now. So, you should be happy or
Yeah.
something. Yeah. It's like,
Right.
don't.
Yeah. You can have your faith, but those are not helpful at that time.
And also, like, everything happens for a reason. I hate that.
Yes, that's a bad one.
There's a lot of chaos in the world. I don't think everything happens for
Mhm.
a reason. And people create a lot of these situations, right? Not all of them, but a lot of them. So, no, there's no like greater reason,
Not helpful.
right?
Not helpful.
How do we get people to stop saying these things?
Oh, I just think people like you and me are going to have to keep educating and sharing what we've learned. And just like any other topic, spreading the word on what's appropriate and inappropriate and helpful and not helpful.
Right. Talking about it. And then the other thing that you talk about is in the workplace, because I think in the workplace, things are kind of compartmentalized. You're not really supposed to be a full human being, right? You're supposed to just be a worker.
Right.
So I know you're a leader of an organization. So how
Mhm.
has this experience changed you and maybe what even you do in your workplace?
Well, we all come to work and bring our problems with us, in reality, and they're in there somewhere, even though if they're not on the surface. So when somebody's experiencing grief in the workplace, I just think it's so important that we acknowledge that and acknowledge them and we don't make them rush through it. And I talk a little bit about creating a safe space. And I mean, like, check in on them a little bit more than you normally would. And, let them know that, like, if you ever want to just walk around the block or if you ever want to talk while we're at work, just send me a message and we'll make it work. Just letting them know that you are a safe haven that they can turn to during the workday.
And I really think that the only people that really do that, at least in my previous workplace, were the people that had been through loss.
Right.
Because I made it a point to do that after I lost Emily, and then other people had losses of children, parents, those kinds of things that I would always go check in on that person. How's it going today?
Yeah.
I'm here and here are some resources for, or just anything I could think of. But I think I might have been the only one. I think other people are a little
Mhm.
afraid to approach the grieving person at work.
Right. I think you're right. It's kind of like, I don't want to bring it up. I don't want to bring up a sore subject and
Right.
I don't want to make them cry or whatever it is. But we know as grievers that it's already in there. They're not bringing it up. It's always on our hearts and minds anyway. So if they notice us kind of unable to perform or spaced off in a meeting, like, those are some cues that maybe we should check in on them a little more closely. And what I really appreciated when I came back to work was that coworkers just kind of like picked up pieces of my job and proactively said, like, I'll do this for a while. I'll just do this for a while. Let me know when you're ready to take it back. I'll take care of this. I'll cancel whatever meetings as we're going all through things. Not everybody is going to be the leader in their office and maybe have more people around them to support on those types of things. But even with a peer, the types of work that they do and say, like, I can do that for a little while. Just take a little extra off of your plate.
Right. Because the grieving may not feel comfortable asking for help. We all feel like we have to handle everything ourselves. I think that's just the American way,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, especially the South Dakota way. We're hard workers and we want to get things done. And I didn't want to ask for help. I'm not good at asking for help in general, but I didn't want to ask for help. And also, my mind was just really foggy for a while.
Grief, especially sudden loss, has been compared to a traumatic brain injury. So I felt like I had a brain injury. I felt like I was not myself. I wasn't thinking as quickly. I couldn't remember things. It felt
Mhm.
that way to me.
Absolutely. And it makes sense because it is such a
Right.
holistic impact. So, anybody can give some grace to somebody going through grief at work, give some grace and know that, they're probably not going to perform like they did a few weeks prior to the loss. And that's important. And then also, I recognized that I needed a lot more encouragement because my confidence was not as high. in the midst of the mind fog and the trauma and all of the other life responsibility things that we have to take care of when we lose someone close to us, that's a big load. And so I did feel a lack of confidence in doing my job as well as I had in the past.
Maybe a sense of overwhelm?
Certainly, overwhelmed. I tend to feel pretty capable of carrying whatever load is thrown my way, and this was overwhelming. And as I got back into the swing of things at work, it meant even more to me to have somebody tell me, "Good job on that." You know, "That was really spot on," or like, "That was really cool what you did." Whatever the encouragement is, like, it meant more to me then than it ever had before.
And then another subject to address on your website is bereavement leave. And this
Mhm.
is something in this country, we give people 3 days if they lost a child or a parent, and I just think that's insane that anybody is gonna be ready to jump back into work and do a great job after 3 days. Did you have a bereavement policy at your company? Did you change it? Tell
Mhm.
me about that.
Actually, yes. We've always offered 3 days paid bereavement.
Standard.
Yeah, so we went with the standard, and through this, doing research and talking to lots of people and exploring the topic, we did increase it to 5 days paid. And then, of course, we offer extended leaves if needed that are just unpaid. So we're doing better. It's not perfect, but, certainly recognizing that 3 days is not enough and giving people the space to take the time that they need without worrying about their job.
Why is it so hard, do you think, for companies to give people more time?
Well, I think, especially in a smaller business, like yours, or, mine's maybe a little more medium sized at 65 people, the absence of a person is really felt drastically, and in a lot of our companies today, we're pretty generous with PTO offerings and other offerings. In our business, we do a birthday holiday and we do where everybody gets 1 day off just for themselves on their birthday, some things like that. So we're pretty generous with time off anyway. And so then if you're adding to the absence, but I guess what I've seen and learned now is bringing people back too soon is they're kind of still absent anyway.
Mhm.
So we need to really give people the time that they need to heal.
I do know of 3 other mothers who lost their children that had to get back to work, right? And
Mhm.
so they went back too soon, and then they all 3 of them ended up getting fired because they weren't performing on their job the way
Mm.
they were previously, which I just thought was just like another loss upon it. Then you lose your job, you lose your child, then you lose your job. But I think it just goes to show for the lack of tolerance that American
Mhm.
business has for
Mhm.
grieving and bereavement and all
Yeah.
of that. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Can do better. So
yeah.
it's a topic that is really important to me, to you, and the more awareness and education that we can do on it, the better.
Right.
Mhm.
I ended up taking short-term disability because I was so riddled with anxiety and panic attacks after I lost my daughter, and it just took a while. Thank goodness I had purchased that policy because if I hadn't, I had a performance job at the time. I was going on television every day, and I
Mm.
I don't know how I would have done that. Of course, every case is different, every person is different, but I think we should try to, in this country, expand bereavement leave from 3 days, and I'm glad that you have. That's wonderful that you
Yeah.
have.
I think we can keep working on that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I know you spoke at this conference, and then you put
Mhm.
out the website. What's next? What are you doing with grief and this subject next?
Well, I'm still talking about it. I'm still going to be promoting it. I'm not exactly sure where else it will go, but I'll keep building out some content around it as I learn more and read more and experience my own experience more. We have, a ways to go. And like I said, I never pictured myself here. I didn't really plan for it. But of all of the professional projects and accomplishments that I have done over the years, this has certainly been the most meaningful. And I've gotten the most response to. Like I said at the conference, people kept coming up to me. I've gotten personal notes over the last 9 months of just people who've seen the content here and there and said it's been super helpful to them. I guess that's what I'm doing is trying to make a positive difference.
Well, that's wonderful, and that's plenty. That's certainly enough. And as you are approaching the year anniversary of your mother's death, do you have a plan of how you're going, to recognize it? Do you know what you'll
Mhm.
do?
We haven't really made a plan as a family specifically, but I know we will. And, this whole year has really been a lot more close knit time together, quality time together as a family, which has been amazing. So I expect that we'll do something like that. We still have some tribute projects that we want to complete for her, like a bench somewhere and some things like that. And so maybe that would align. It also happens to be my 20-year wedding anniversary right at about the same time. So my husband and I are taking a trip and I'm really looking forward to that. And so I know that's what she would want is for us to continue celebrating life. And I know she'd be pleased with what we're doing with her legacy as well.
Yeah, I'm sure she would be. I wish I could have
Mhm.
known her. She sounds like an amazing woman. But I really appreciate you delving into this topic of grief and sharing what you've learned with others. I think the more we can talk about it, the better.
I agree. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for coming on the podcast. And thank you for listening to this episode of Grieving Out Loud. We've covered the topic of grief in several other episodes. You can find links to them in the show notes. Thanks again for spending your time with us. Until next week, wishing you faith, hope, and courage. This podcast is produced by Casey Wonnenberg King and Anna Phi.